auditorium was one of the conversations. There was, at least for us as designers, we had a lot of conversation on both morning and evening sessions. There was conversation around the enrichment programs and how to accommodate those in the school, which was very helpful. As whichever option we move forward with, it's going to be a very helpful conversation to understand the kind of spaces and how we're going to need to articulate the space to accommodate those programs. Some discussion about parking and driveways and some traffic interaction between teacher parking and drop-off spaces. There was some conversation around the 1- and 2-story buildings, how you create a community in a 2-story building versus a 1-story building. Certainly a lot of other questions. I'm probably not capturing all of it, and I don't need to cite any, but these are some of the things that will help us as designers in terms of the conversation. There was I think what other highlights. Others. Oh yeah. In terms of the site, one of the things we have not as a group yet focused on, but will be, is pedestrian access. And certainly now, folks who come in the so-called back door. Some of the schemes work, others don't right now, to allow pedestrians to come in from the back of the site. I think any of them, as we move forward, can certainly accommodate that once we know that that's an issue. But that was surfaced. I mean, that was important that we understand how the site is actually used. We talked a bit about phasing, about how students would be accommodated throughout the building. Tried to express how that would work. Certainly discussed, as we always do, a lot of questions around the MSBA and funding and what's fundable and what isn't fundable and how the process works.
Community use of the.
Jump in, whatever.
There was also some questions about access to the spaces for community use, whether it's for voting or for after-hour activities, and how that would work in the different schemes.
Questions about roof systems, pitched roofs versus flat roofs in New England. I think, generally speaking, I'll go out on a limb and say everyone came down inside pitched roofs, which is clearly the direction we're going to be heading primarily anyway. So that was I think a really robust conversation. Each session lasted about 2 hours, longer I think than the previous sessions did. And we appreciated all the feedback and the conversation from everybody. It's going to be very helpful. I think it'll be helpful tonight for those of you who are able to listen to that and read the boards to understand the feedback from the community. And it's going to be very helpful whichever direction you head for us to fine-tune and refine during schematic design and to take into account a lot of these community issues, concerns, observations as we move forward. Any questions?
Okay. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, reviewing cost estimates. Actually, I'm going to let Mike Burton kind of walk us through the spreadsheet, but voting members do have a packet that has a quick recap of the criteria. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions or go through that one more time for committee members. On the second page, which was distributed earlier, was a quick breakdown and comparison of the different options. As you know, the designers have hired a consultant to cost estimate all 5 options as they stand right now. And in addition, Dorn Whittier also contracted with a cost estimator. The 2 estimates were reconciled on Tuesday, and the results are shown on your sheet. Carrying the more conservative of the 2. We do have backup of the estimates if people are interested. Just a comparison of all 2 across the options on a line item by line item basis. We do also have 1 physical hard copy of both estimates, each in that order of magnitude of about 60 to 70 pages. So if you're interested in that detail, they were provided on the project Dropbox for your convenience, and we do have a hard copy here today if anything needs to be referenced. So with that, I'll let you take the driver's seat.
So this format should be familiar to everybody on the committee. This is the same version that we had. Maybe we should probably grab the lights or something.
Yeah.
So it's the same version that we had before. As everybody recalls, at the end of PDP, we had worked up some preliminary numbers, and so same format, but I will take a moment to just kind of walk through the sheet to refresh everybody's memory. But before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about some of these notes on the side. And so I think one of the most important things that this group and everybody needs to understand is that these numbers are preliminary, and they are being used for option comparison only, meaning whatever numbers are voted at this phase, we are not locked into this number, okay? This is for option comparison only. These are very preliminary numbers. They're derived by basically square foot cost estimates, which are based on all the multiple trades, and you know, we have the detail here to support that, but it's really important that everybody knows this is not the final number. The way the MSBA works is that after this phase, once one option is selected, we get into schematic design. And only at that time, more drawings become available, there's more detailed estimates come along with that, and at the end of that, you fill out a 3011, which is the basis for your project scope and budget agreement, okay? So I just want to make sure everybody is clear on the process. Did you have a question, Andy?
I did. I wondered if you considered the estimates at this point conservative, and if you tend to see in these processes that there's an opportunity for the number to come down for a given.
I do believe they are conservative,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so similar to at the end of PDP, the first time we put numbers out, maybe a month and a half or so ago, maybe 2 months ago, you know, I think I told you at the time too, it's best at this stage to be conservative, and I feel the same applies to these numbers that you're looking at here tonight.
Thanks.
Mike, is there a way you can zoom a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that a little bit better?
Eh,
Yeah?
you're all getting there.
Did I hear a mint?
That's much better. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Can we look at this list? I'd like you to speak to number 6. You just kind of explain that.
Note 6?
Notes.
Yes, yes, so the way the sheet works, just again, real high level, the blue box is construction, okay? Construction, you can call it hard cost, whatever. And then the orange box below it is soft costs. The blue plus the orange equals your total project budget, which is in the middle of the sheet in the white cells, okay? Top box plus the second box equals your total project budget. Everything on the lower half of this sheet is a little bit of the inner workings on how the MSBA looks at your project and calculates what they're going to reimburse and what they're not going to reimburse. Note 6, I've assumed that they are not going to accept anything from owner's contingency, which is highly unlikely. Okay, so again, this is more conservative in terms of what the actual reimbursement from the MSBA will be. It comes down to a change order by change order basis, and to forecast that right now, I think puts the committee at a disadvantage, and so we're just assuming the worst case.
So some change orders could be reimbursable and some.
Absolutely,
Great.
and if I had to guess, I would say 3 to 5% of that.
Okay.
So that's note 6. Any other question on any of these notes?
So I have a question just regards with the totals.
Yes.
So I'm looking at other documents that were in the folder, and the prices are different, and I'm trying to understand, what did I miss?
Let me walk you through the sheet, and then hopefully that clears some of it up, because I think if you have questions, others probably do as well. And so, again, just walking through the blue box, this is, when we originally presented it was square foot driven, and now that we have detailed estimates, we have information to support that. And so line number 1, that's the square foot of the building, and I'm going to use N1 as my example right here. If you see, there's PDP, that was what was presented a month or 2 ago, and then PSR, that's where we are today, okay? And so N1 during the PDP process was 80,770 square feet. Today, the way it's drawn on that board, it's 88,900 square feet. So that particular option got bigger, okay? N3, same thing, it went from 8770 to 82.8. So bigger, but less square footage, all right? The square footage is applied to the dollars per square foot, which is line 3, and that is transferred down to line 6, which is basically your construction cost. Square foot times construction cost per square foot. The other lines we had in there were phasing, and so line 7, at the time, we didn't have most of this phasing worked out to the level that it's at now, so we had $3 million in there for phasing. The estimators had a chance to take a look at that, and now they feel confident that N1, for example, N1 is basically one big building, one phase, therefore less phasing, and it's about $323,000. N3, multiple phases, more phasing costs, $626,000, and same with N9. And so that's what the phasing costs represent. Site work, again, knowing more about the project than we did at PDP, we've been able to bring the site numbers down. For the new options, we were right around $4.5 million, and now we're just around $3 million based on these estimates. Any questions on the blue box?
Does that fit under the MSBA parameters?
We'll get there.
Completely split?
Yep,
Okay.
it does in most options. The only N1 and N3 are just over the 8% site cap. I'll get there too.
Okay.
So blue box, good, great. Next box, the orange, this is what's called the soft costs. These are all the other things that you need to buy throughout the project. Modular classrooms, as everybody recalls, was one of our biggest concerns. Modular classrooms are, there's zero reimbursement for modulars, and so we were tasked with trying to reduce the overall quantity of modulars in many of these phases, and we were able to do so. N3 is an example. We had $1.6 million for modulars previously, and now we're down to $648,000. So any reduction in modular cost is a good thing for the job, not to mention impact to students. So that's modulars. Feasibility and schematic phase, that's the phase we're in right now. That's the cost that's already been approved and voted, and that's what we're doing right now. Legal is an estimate that we sat with Avi and we came up with what we felt was a reasonable cost. OPM cost, this is the direct link from the construction cost. MSBA has a 3.5% cap on what an OPM can make, so that's just a straight multiplier. Architectural and engineer, that's JCJ, same thing, construction cost 10%. CM at risk, we have, as an SBC, decided to go CM at risk as a delivery method for the project, and there is a pre-construction premium, so that's the $100,000 to have them come on board and help us through the rest of schematic design. Miscellaneous project costs, these are just exactly what it sounds like. We're going to have utility fees, we're going to have testing as the school is being constructed, several other things, and this is based off of other projects that we've done of similar size. Technology and FF&E. We had a discussion about this yesterday, and I think we know a little bit more about technology, where the MSBA caps, they do it per number of students. So if we have 335 students, they give you $1,200 per student for technology and $1,200 per student for furniture. So number of students times 2,400, that's where they stop. That's lower than what most schools end up buying. And so we talked a little bit about this with JCJ and other folks, and so we were asked to put it at $3,000 per student for this particular phase. So again, using N1 as an option, as an example, you can see during the PDP we had 800,000, now we have $1 million.
3,000 total for technology and furniture, so, right?
I'm sorry?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, and then owner's contingency, these are basically 5% of the construction cost. We have to have that. This is just a subtotal of all these other ones. I did that for some of the calculations below. So again, between the construction cost in the blue and the orange cost, that gets you to your total project budget. And so R1 is 35.7 million, AR2 is 55.7 million, N1 is 57 million, N3 is 55.5 million, and N9, which doesn't have a PDP column next to it because it didn't exist at the time, it's kind of a hybrid, is now the highest at 62.6 million. So that, I'm going to pause right there and just see if there's any questions, because ultimately everything else on this sheet is really more FYI for you guys to understand, because ultimately everybody wants to know, okay, well, how much is our share going to be? Meaning how much is Manchester's going to be and how much is Essex going to be? And so I can get through that, but before I do, is there any question? Oh, cool, details. Is there any question on, there's a sale on Adidas. Great news. Sorry about that. So, are there any questions so far?
Wouldn't you want contingency for your, for AR1 and, for R1 and AR2 to be higher, because there's so many unknowns?
Yeah, so I think we carried 7% for the Rs and ARs and 5% for new.
Okay.
Any other? Okay, so again, lines, and I'm going by the numbering on the sheet, not on the side of this screen here, 21 and 22. 21 is the total project cost, 22 is the total project cost per square foot, just so everybody understands what those numbers are. I think we'll, yeah, we can come back to that. I just want to finish this sheet and then see if anybody's got more. So, back to MSBA and how do they reimburse us? So, 31% is the minimum reimbursement that they offer, which is what this school district had received. In addition to the 31%, some of the options, if you choose a renovation or an add renovation, they give you some points for that. And so if you do a renovation project, you would get 5%. An AR, we figured it would be roughly 1.3%. And then on all the new options, it's all new, so there's no incentive whatsoever, so it's zeros. Maintenance, this increased since last time we spoke. I think last time we were at 1% for maintenance, and some more information was sent to the MSBA, and it's since been revised. And they gave what I've seen as the highest percentage point on any job I've worked on for maintenance, which is 1.8, maximum of 2. So that's pretty good.
Kudos to Avi, right?
Yeah.
I don't do the maintenance, I just supervise it.
I'm gonna name a hall after.
Every fraction of a percent helps, and so that's really amazing. So then we have CM at risk. This is, again, we chose to use the CM at risk process, and this is one of the last jobs that the MSBA is going to provide that's going to give this 1% as an incentive, because it's becoming more popular and almost everybody's using it, and so they don't feel the need to offer an incentive for it anymore. But we do have it here. And then green, this is for LEED certification, and all the new options, we would get the full 2 points. You wouldn't be able to get that on a renovation, so that's therefore 0. So essentially what this section is doing is it's taking your 31% where you started, adding up all the multipliers and showing you what the assumed reimbursement rate is going to be. And just similar with the numbers, I'm going to caution you that all of these numbers in this whole section I'm showing you, this is quite frankly a crystal ball, and until the MSBA signs a project scope and budget agreement, we can't tell you with accuracy what they're going to say and what they're going to allow and what they're not. And so this is our best guess, and similar to the project numbers, they are going to change. So as long as everybody's clear. So let's take N3 as an example. So right now we're at 35.8%. So everybody's probably doing some quick math and saying, okay, well, it's 55.5 million, 35%. That's not actually how it works. There's certain caps that the MSBA takes out of the project, and that's what this gray section is here. Site work costs, they cap your site work at 8% of total construction. And so if your site costs are over 8% of the total construction, that's on the district's back. So N1 and N3 are over that 8% by 842,000. N9 was not. Obviously R1 and AR2 were not.
So it's listing it for the PDP, but not the PSR.
For the site cap, because it's actually.
Not over the site cap.
The site cap all.
But the site cap went up.
No, it's not. So if it's a positive number, it's an NA, because they don't give you money back for being under the 8%, so that's correct.
But in
You
N1,
have
the
under
PR,
PDP
the
rather than under PSR.
maybe the total cost went up, so it's probably.
That PDP time, we were forecasting an overage.
Yeah, so I'm not changing the PDP, and the PSR is correct.
It's because the total project cost went
So
down.
none of them are over.
None of them are over. Ineligible square foot for the ed program. So I think when we talked last time, we had another, or JCJ had another sheet, and there were 2 areas that we thought were areas that the MSBA typically would not reimburse for, and so there were 1,600 square feet for a gym, a little bit bigger than normal, and then there was a Parks and Recs area that was about 1,800 square feet for a total of 3,400 square feet. They take that 3,400 square feet and multiply that by the total project cost per square foot, and so that comes off the top as ineligible. The one other good thing that happened in addition to the maintenance increase in reimbursement points is that the MSBA has just recently raised the cap on construction, so it was at $326. That is now $333 per square foot. So that's another good thing for the job. You know, on an 80,000-ish square foot building, it's probably over $500,000. So again, every dollar counts, so that's a good thing for the job. But if you go back and take a look, so for example, I keep picking on N1, let's go to N9. N9 is $500 per square foot, okay? 333 is their cap, and if you're at $500 per square foot, everything above that 333 is ineligible, and that's on the district's back. So that's what that is. That's one of the biggest impacts, and you'll see line 31, that's one of the biggest negative numbers, and so that's how the MSBA does it.
But there's room there for us to kind of, you know, suck it up a little, right? To kind of
How do you
reduce
mean?
that. Pardon?
I don't think I understand the question.
Reduce the square footage.
Reduce the cost per square foot. That's what we want to do. The closer we can get.
Both.
Well, both,
Yeah, both.
actually.
Yeah.
Right answer right there.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah,
Yes.
both would help, and yes, there's the opportunity, depending on your appetite for the program, to reduce both.
Yeah, and like the FF&E and technology reimbursement ceiling, you know, the 1,200 per, the construction cost per square foot is similar to that in that they don't set that as an expectation. It's set knowing that all projects are above that limit as it stands. And so they do that intentionally.
And I think you're gonna show the MSBA averages in a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see these the cost per square foot numbers here, with the exception maybe of the 500, the others are all pretty well in line with what other schools are costing right now, so these aren't crazy out of line. It's just the construction market for schools in Massachusetts right now is pretty high.
Can I just ask clarifying back on the ineligible square foot per ed program? Do the square foot as currently calculated include the Parks and Rec option?
Yeah, it's the 1,600 square feet for the gym, and it's the,
Yeah, it's kind of different spaces.
But do we have that, I don't recall designating a space in the drawings for that.
But didn't we leave that square footage in because if you take it out, we can't add it back in? Right. So I think we left it in just for,
It's in your space.
while we figure it out if it's
So
native to the
so does
town.
that mean that effectively the square foot numbers on this chart are slightly larger than what's on the images over here, on the plans? How could that be if we don't have a space designated for it?
The gym, yeah, the gym is included, the only space that isn't is the youth services space.
It's not.
It's not
So
drawn.
it's just gonna spread out amongst the gross square footage?
Will be added.
It's there, it's in the numbers.
It's in the space template, it's not in the drawings.
Oh,
And because it's in the space template, it's in the numbers?
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
We financially accounted for it, but we haven't
Drawn
chosen
it.
drawn
Okay.
other ineligible soft costs. The orange box above, again, that represents the soft costs. They cap reimbursement on soft costs at 20% of your construction cost. So that's what line number 33 represents. Ineligible FF&E and technology, as we said before, we had assumed that we were going to be right at the 2,400 per student. We've since increased that, so you'll see on, again, N1, that additional $200,000 would be ineligible because we went from 2,400 per student to 3,000 per student. And then a vinyl asbestos tile, they just categorically don't reimburse for that at all. And so you take your cost, you take out all these things that they won't pay for, and that's when you actually apply the percentage above, which is on line number 28. And so it's not necessarily the total construction cost, which is the biggest misconception about how the MSBA works. It's after you take all these other things out. And so with that, that gets you down to, let's see. So what this tells us is at the very bottom line, 42, what I call the effective reimbursement rate. So N3, we think it's, they say it's 35.8. When you actually do all the math and you take out all the ineligible stuff, what it really works out to be is about 25%. That's the effective reimbursement, okay? And so after the 25% is applied to that, the district share on N3 would be 41.6 million of the 55.5 million. And then if you take, I'm not 100% sure that the share or separation is 66% for Manchester and 33% for Essex. But if it was, that would be the represented on line 39 and 40.
The most recent update on that is extremely close to what you've estimated.
Okay.
And it would change, you gotta run the apportionment formula right before you do the bonding, and that would be based on the formula at that time, but it's very close.
So everything below the line, again, these three boxes, this is really to understand how the MSBA looks at your project and where items are going to be taken off as ineligible. And so ultimately what the task for this group now is to, now you've been armed, you saw numbers at PDP, now you're seeing a little bit better numbers based on actual estimates. So these numbers and these options are where we're at, and really the next step for this committee here is to choose an option. And that option, it may not look exactly like what you see up here. In fact, it probably won't. We can still change things, we can still mold things. So we're not locked into these numbers, we're not necessarily locked into exactly what's on that board, but we do need to pick a horse, and we do need to get into schematic design to move the process forward. And so that's where we're at.
Mike, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So line 31 in an eligible construction, just to be clear in my mind. So in the ed plan, we requested more classrooms than they allowed for in the space summary because we anticipate that our population's going to run back up and we're going to need the 3 per grade level. Is that currently being covered in 31 or up in the eligible construction costs?
More than line 30. If I'm understanding the question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I picked
Yeah.
the wrong line.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The
So
assumption
We have that list if you're interested
Yeah.
in seeing it.
I'm just
I think we
curious
should.
what assumption we're making going
Well,
into that,
yeah,
whether
the
we're going to
assumption-
get clearance or not.
Yeah, well, when we discussed this, the things that where you have not yet received a yes, a definitive yes, we
Yep.
assume to be no. And I
Okay.
believe the extra classrooms right now are in the maybe category with
Mhm.
MSBA. So I know that was our conversation yesterday as we were putting this together. So I know when we first shared that list with you, we had things that we were pretty sure we were gonna get approved on, things we were sure would be no's, and things in the middle. So at this point, if you don't have an actual yes on it, you assume for this exercise it was no.
So there's room for improvement on that number if we
Yes.
make a better case?
Yes.
Okay.
If there's a better case and if they approve some of the square footage, that number will improve, yes.
Great.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah, there's the list.
So if you were to look at this list and see what's, like, where we can, drill down to kind of tighten it up, this is an area, and,
So the thing for you to be aware of for like your 3 classrooms, here we had assumed yes, it's still a maybe from the MSBA, but part of it will be the ongoing conversation and the response to the PDP that will be sent to them this
yeah.
this next week. So
So,
So if I could just summarize to be clear, we assumed yes back when we did this table that's on the graphic. It's still a maybe from MSBA's perspective, depending on how we argue it, but in the numbers here, you've assumed no?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, you've assumed
Taking a
no.
conservative approach.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that they're gonna reimburse.
Right.
Right.
For purposes of running the numbers.
But the square footage is in here.
Right.
Great.
We,
And just so everybody knows, the basis of that is what they've allowed for in the space summary is 2 classrooms per grade level. And historically, Memorial runs at 3 sections. We are experiencing quite a dip in demographics right now, but we anticipate it will go back to its normal state at some point. And I think we heard a lot last night, you don't want to build too small when there is a very strong case to be made for the fact that we're going to grow.
And so you have an opportunity in the response to the MSBA to explain that in greater detail,
Yeah.
which we will, and then it's likely to come up in the Facilities Assessment Subcommittee before the board meeting. And it's just another opportunity. This is kind of defending your thesis. You know, it's not in line with their guidelines, but they really want supportive documentation explanation, so.
So are we gonna review this sheet again and talk about that? Is that what our game plan is now?
So we need to clear, we're having a sidebar here, because I think I misspoke based on some old information. Sorry, but I want to make sure this is clear. The classrooms have been assumed as a yes at this point. Right. So we did use this chart.
So the numbers that were on the previous sheet, on this sheet right here, assume that everything in this category is a yes,
Okay.
okay? This enlarged gymnasium and this Parks and Recs are not. Okay, so it's 3,400, should be 3,400 square feet times total project cost, which is 650 or 700 in that range. Do the math, that should be the number on the previous sheet. So I just want to clarify
Yeah,
that.
I apologize, I was working off some old information.
It's okay.
Things have been moving fast as we prepare this.
Yep. Any other questions on this sheet?
If you want, Amy was looking for some assistance walking through the criteria.
Yeah,
Update?
when we're done with this, we're going to do that.
Right, and so there's kind of two tools that are gonna be left in front of you tonight to ultimately make a decision. So obviously, the number is a big piece of the puzzle, but through a series of conversations, JCJ's put together the criteria sheet, which analyzes how each one of these options aligns with some of the goals that were set by the SBC earlier in the project. And so if I can figure it out, I will pull that up. Is that-
So the options are in here. Should we refer to one?
Full screen. I hate moving. Okay. Yeah, so this is the other part. Now, this is also a table that we had shared previously. What we've done now is obviously reduce it to the 5 options. You've used this table and this criteria through the process to try to identify the differences relative one to the other. Probably that shouldn't say recommendations up at the top, it should say analysis, because that's really what this is our pass at giving you some guidance in where we think, from our team conversation, the schemes either are neutral on one of the criteria, they don't really help it or hurt it, they may be disadvantageous, or they may be advantageous, and that's kind of the scale we had set up previously to look at this. We've gone back and actually, based on the updated drawings and further conversation with the committee and some of the input at the community meetings, have gone back and taken another pass at this. You may disagree with these, you may have, and will have, I'm sure, different opinions, but this was our kind of professional best estimate of where things stand. I could walk through them at a very high level or dive in.
So I want to make sure we go through this pretty thoroughly so that because this is going to be our record of what happened. So can we take time to go through each line? And
Sure. Yeah, I can explain our logic, and
Great.
our logic may be different than how the committee sees some of these things, but I can certainly walk you through what the team's logic was in putting this together. I think the best way to do it will be just to go down the criteria, and then there may end up being other things that you want to add, other things that you may want to add. So we'll start with the educational goals. The first line was meets the district space program goals, and that was a pretty binary choice. That's the space program, the space template that we came up with early in the process. Either the scheme has all of the rooms you need at the right size, or it doesn't. The renovation scheme, R1, as we've talked about, doesn't move any of the walls, doesn't make the building any bigger, doesn't change anything programmatically. All it does is do a code upgrade and a systems upgrade on the building. So that one doesn't meet your educational program. All the classrooms remain undersized relative to NSBA standards.
Jim, what's an example of, so in the case of R1, where it's unfavorable in that regard, what's an example of, say, how one of the classrooms might not meet the educational program?
The size, the
But
base
I
size,
know,
yeah.
but in does it not meet it?
Some of the classrooms are 800 square feet,
820.
820 square feet versus 950.
Are there things you can't do in there as a result of that you can do in the correctly sized room?
Yes. In terms of elementary education, where you're setting up stations in the corners, and you're doing individualized learning plans, and you're moving kids around the room,
So
that
flexible.
requires space. So it really moves the space. And
Does John want to
can
speak to
certainly
that?
Well, yeah, so I think when the school was built, it was obviously a more traditional time where kids maybe sat in rows.
Yeah.
So you could fit, 25 desks in a row, in rows rather. But now what we do is deliver kind of a general concept to the students, and they break out into 4 or 5 breakout stations based on kind of their readiness level for that particular topic. So when I taught, I had 1 breakout area. And I mean, how many, you have 3, 4 breakout areas in your classroom? 3, yeah. So that extra square footage would allow those spaces to break out, yeah.
Thanks.
The other part of that, just as a fine point, is the MSBA is looking, we have to fill out the space summary template, and we have to show, they have their requirements, which are in 1 column. We have to show what we're providing, and then if there's a delta, we have to explain it, and they will likely not fund a project that has classrooms that are significantly undersized. That's educational appropriateness. There's an actual funding issue there as well, in terms of one of the things they ask about will be why are you asking us to fund a school that has classrooms that are 100 square feet smaller?
Is there a way to find that out early when you, as you make this decision? Because it seems to me that this spreadsheet that we just spent a lot of time on changes significantly if in fact MSBA would not fund the R1 at this level. So is there a way to because if in fact they wouldn't fund undersized classrooms, then we should have that reflected in this spreadsheet. And we're assuming that they're funding it at the same level as other things, but it's
Actually, when you read their module, they actually ask you to go through this exercise. It's fairly specific in terms of asking you to go through the exercise. And I think the spreadsheet had a note on it about, did one of your notes?
Yeah,
the
first
first
number,
There was
note
a
number
note
7.
describe the unlikeliness. Right, but I don't think you can,
You have to look at it.
yeah.
Okay.
No, my point is, we're looking at it, but as we look at these numbers, they're assuming that we are going to be reimbursed fully for the R1.
It's assuming that they would accept the
So,
project at all.
is there a-
They would just say, most likely, it
So I
doesn't.
guess my question is there a way, given that I think that just for people who haven't been immersed in this, they're gonna look at this and say, well, R1 is so much less expensive. And that's looking at it with the that would be accepted for funding. So is there a way for us to determine whether they would even accept it for funding? Because if they wouldn't, then that reimbursement number should go to
If they
0.
wouldn't, you could still renovate it for 33.7 million, 100% paid for by the
That
district.
was exactly what I was going to say. That's actually the answer. You just eliminate any funding at all, and that would be your cost
That's your
to
answer.
the district.
So maybe to Sarah's
Right, that's
point,
a-
it's worth at least an important note
Yeah.
on here that
That's,
likely to be rejected based on square footage.
Yeah, it's a
That's what
strange,
he's,
I know,
yeah,
but I know what
if you
she's
really
saying.
carried
it's a
forward,
strange
that's a big
paradox,
difference.
because the MSBA, as they mentioned, you're required to study it. And I understand, because we have the luxury of having been involved in the process the entire time, that we kind of understand that layer, so I think that's a really good point. The other point too is that we know, that you may not know, is that the MSBA has never done an R1 type scenario, and so it's really an exercise. So,
they
to your
haven't,
point, we should footnote that.
but they make us do this?
They have a separate maintenance and repair program to do certain small projects, but to my knowledge, they've not done, they haven't taken a building that's undersized and just done a code upgrade.
It is an important
Not in the core
consideration, just
program.
because.
No, it's a
Where the
good
numbers
point.
go on
Yeah.
the new and even the addition reno scheme are. you know,
So
they're-
ineligible costs could be
they're a lot more
essentially
than we
the whole
anticipate.
thing. Yeah,
And I think the ed plan phrase is just, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot to a lot of people. People don't really know what's in it. But if you can put it in dollars and cents, that the likelihood of it actually being accepted is low. And if accepted, likelihood of
that's really important.
eligible cost low. So the cost would be borne by the district, and we would make the decision to go with undersized classrooms and
So maybe
pay full
if
cost.
we could revise this with, or range in that, for R1, from no reimbursement up to the full reimbursement. And I think that does two things. One is it says that we may not get any reimbursement, and thus its actual cost to us is higher. But in addition, if MSBA rejects it, they build hundreds of schools across the state, and their whole purpose is to create a window of not too much, not excess, but also not substandard. And if they reject a plan because it's substandard, then that is saying that we would be asked to spend, the taxpayers to spend 35 million for a substandard product. So I think it's important that we really call that out.
Right, and so just so we're clear, that range would be line 41, which is 22.8 million, to line 21, which is 33.7. That's your range.
But I, yeah,
24
So can we expand the note, using
Absolutely.
what Pam had just
Absolutely.
noted? And
No,
That
absolutely.
way, it's not really about merits of STEM lab versus
Exactly.
gym size. It's really about base standard for
Absolutely.
size of
That's
building to
really
accommodate
important.
current growth.
Yeah, R1 is really a different case than the others in terms of how you would look at it. I think that's a good point to make.
I think another useful footnote is that new construction at least, or the addition portion of that reno, they're technically a 50-year building design versus a reno is, I don't know how you classify
It's
that.
going to be 100 years old at the end of the 50-year lifespan.
Anyway.
Yeah, and Sarah, your comment is well taken too, because, on the chart, and we'll get to AR2 in a minute, but they both have the red circle for that one line item, but for two different reasons. In renovation, it's primarily classrooms, but in AR2, space programs, includes the gym area, which was in the education.
Yeah, in AR2, the only reason it's disadvantageous is that the gym as it currently exists doesn't meet the request for a full-size gym,
yeah,
so you have
that's
an
different,
undersized gym.
that's different.
Yeah.
But the classrooms are all going to be brand new, so the classrooms will all meet it. So there is a subtlety there that needs to be recognized.
So we should probably make that one neutral in the
Could be neutral, yeah. Yeah, just if you're looking at a way to separate them and to make distinction, I think that's a reasonable thing to think about. And that's where you need to kind of weight these, and that's why we're.
You could probably, if I'm looking at this correctly, you could say it meets the district's program goals because we already have allow for competition size gym below.
Yeah, it's double
It's-
counting the issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that could either be a neutral or a advantageous, but certainly neutral means it meets it. And all the three new schemes, because they're new schemes, they're being built exactly to the standards for both the MSBA and as you've modified them, so those are all advantageous. So the only difference between AR2 and the three new schemes really comes down to the assembly space, the gym, auditorium space, and the cafeteria configuration. So that really is the only difference. So if you did that as a neutral and the others as green, that might be a way to separate those. The flexibility for future building expansion really has to do with physical expansion outside the building. The way we looked at it, it wasn't the idea that you could co-op space inside if you needed for a bubble classroom. This was just the fact that right now, given under the R1, it sprawls all over the site. It's going to be very difficult to find a place to easily add on to the building. Same with AR2, as it's currently designed, is not as easy to add on to as, or as N1, just the building configuration. There's no obvious place without disrupting either parking or being in wetlands to do that. It's probably not a big thing. It's going to be a little easier for 3 or 9 because of their configuration to add a couple of additional classrooms in construction. But that's my feeling is that's a pretty minor consideration, but it's something the MSBA wants you to look at.
Well, it may be minor, maybe not. I mean, I think right now the enrollment's 335, and so I don't know if the projections have changed since the initial SOI went in, but it's an important consideration because this is a 50-year building, and if you're going to have any peaks coming down in that 50 years and you don't have the ability to address that in some way, shape, or form, this becomes a pretty important factor.
The next one, which is the reconfiguration for grade level, that had to do with the internal reconfiguration. So if you have a bubble year come through again, is it easy or not to move classrooms around, to rethink how the grades are structured, to convert a room to a classroom that isn't currently, or to find another room?
I don't understand why those are neutral on the new, given the fact that we have these STEM rooms and.
Or why did you feel that AR2 gave us more flexibility there?
I would say everything is green except for the renovation.
I
think so too.
Yeah, I think you could argue that as well. That they're all about the same in terms of the flexibility. When we first started, we thought the more classrooms you had per floor, the easier it would be to reconfigure grades. So if they're too finely tuned, then you'd end up with a bubble class split between floors. So we were trying to look at the length of the corridor. But I think at this point, any of these will adjust whichever way you go. Maybe the corridors could get longer or shorter on almost any of them. 2, even on 2, it could swing around and move up towards the core. So
Are we in a tough spot because we're a group of 3? Is that what limits a lot of options for easy clustering? Or is it just something I created in my head?
No, I think like many things, the site is
Okay.
the site and the idea that we're trying to build this around the existing building is more limiting than the number of, because that really limits how you can configure the classroom on the site, the classrooms on the site.
So do we all think those should be
They
green?
should be all be green then?
Yeah.
Except the first, yeah?
Except the first.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The other one minimizes impact to students during construction. This one we actually had a lot of conversation around, and the only reason that N9 ended up not being neutral, we thought the others were all about the same, was that it was going to be a longer construction period with more phases involved. And now we're also really beginning to split hairs here, and we can talk about it. For instance, N1 is, as you're building the entire new building, you're moving kids into a lot of modulars, building the entire new building, and then moving into the new building. So it's kind of one move, but you're in modulars for the entire construction period. And 3, it's a very small number of modulars for a very short time before you move it back into permanent construction. Not really kind of sure how to weigh that, which is why we sort of left them all about the same. And N9 was the only one that seemed significantly longer with more moves as you look through it. So it really is a question of time in modulars versus overall phasing time and disruption and number of moves. And we weren't sure that at this point, because these have evolved, that there was a whole lot of difference between them except for N9, which seemed to be much longer. And then this one we actually changed, and this is certainly worthy of conversation, but as we've been working on these with you and as we've had various conversations, we actually clarified this line to talk about a whole school gathering space with a stage, because that, as we talked even as late as last night and talked about wanting to get the whole school together with teachers and maybe parents, that you have to go across the street. right now that you can't use the auditorium because it's too small to get the whole school together. That made us rethink how we were looking at this. And right now, R1 and AR2 do not have a space in them that you can get the whole school together with a stage in the building, because we're leaving you the spaces you have now in both of those. So really, you don't have that space, if that's important. In all of the new ones, you've got various combinations of space, either the cafeteria with the stage in it that opens to the gym, or the gym with a stage in it that opens to the cafeteria. So in all of those, you would have a space with a stage that you could gather the whole school in. But that was our interpretation of what we've been hearing. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that was kind of how we were hearing you.
Do you have, Lauren, a ballpark of how many people you could fit in the large gathering spaces? I mean, I know that in school meetings, kids sometimes sit on the floor. I mean, but if you were doing a performance or something, do you have any idea of like what the seating would be?
Which options?
In,
The gym?
If you were to use the gym.
yeah,
Nope. Well, I'll tell you, the one we did, clunking seats 1,000.
what?
When you open the door to the cafeteria,
How many did you say?
1,000?
it's a bigger cafeteria though.
Maybe Essex could come over.
Well,
That was,
just
it's a
If we were
it's a
invited.
K-8
pictures when
school.
we've had to have an inside graduation in
Yeah.
the gym.
It's a 17.
So that, wow, that's a lot of people. Okay,
Stand by.
Yeah.
okay.
At 7 square feet per person.
At 7, it's, yeah, it's
Yeah.
the gym is 7,200, 7,400 square feet, so at 7 square feet per person, which is code for standing,
Yeah,
that would be over 1,000.
but for
Be
chairs.
tight, I mean, that'd be tight, so chairs would be,
10 square feet per person is a rough rule of thumb with so 700. I think comfortably with, if you were setting up rows of chairs and you wanted to leave enough circulation room to be code legal, you're probably talking about 700 people.
Okay, that's great.
Is that with the cap open?
Oh, that's what the bleachers closed.
Just the
not
gym?
chairs.
that's just the gym.
Yeah, it's just
There's a
the
lot of
gym.
people.
So that's, you know, if you looked at the elementary school in Gloucester that we went to, that was really tight, and that was just the cafeteria and the stage. And that was 200 or 250, and that was not gonna do it, so the gym is a better, great.
Yeah, the cafeteria, we were just thinking, the cafeteria would probably be about 220, yeah, the
Yeah.
cafeteria wouldn't be big enough, it'd be like 225,
Yeah.
240, if it was just the cafeteria.
And that was just a platform in Gloucester.
Yeah.
They didn't have an
Which I
actual
didn't think it
stage.
was a bad thing, but
We can debate later.
fight for another night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so I think-
schematic
I think
design,
The
right?
position here is that if it's just the cafeteria with the stage, it's probably gonna be too small.
Yeah.
If it's the gym, it'll be plenty big.
Great, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming you probably need around 500 for an average, for the whole school, plus teachers, plus room, so you'll be a little, plenty of room for that.
We should table this if it's gonna start a rabbit hole, but has any school that's opted for the large stage in the gym also done a platform for practice or rehearsal in the caf?
Not that we've done,
Okay.
not that we've done.
Would you anticipate that as a huge expense?
I would anticipate that as an expense, but it could be so many different things.
You're asking for two?
I'm playing through in my head some of the conflict that would arise having basketball going on when you need to have play
Oh, I
practice
see.
or something, or an event. So can you set up to regroup some space?
We've got one leg,
Yes,
we've got
thank
one
you.
leg in the rabbit hole, but I
Yeah.
think that the short answer to try to put a bow on it is we could figure a way out in some other space in the building to create a rehearsal performance, small space in a cost-effective way. I'm sure of it, once we figure that, get into this. Okay?
Yeah,
So that was our logic on how to try to balance that one based on what we needed. In terms of the next two, those were the community, really kind of community use ones. And of these, really, in terms of providing independent access, and we talked about this certainly a lot at the community workshops yesterday, the only one that doesn't provide good community access where you can close off the wing is N1. That's going to be a challenge no matter how we look at it. We'll find ways to put doors in there, but it's not going to work as well as the others. Because it's in the middle, it's going to be tough to do. But all the others provide you with a separate wing, separate access, close it off, let the community use it even during the day. And then the next one down was the gym one. Obviously, the two renovation options, it's the gym you have now, which is not the size you're looking for competition. The other three are brand new gyms.
So can I just ask, because I guess I must have missed something, the competition-sized gym, elementary school competition? Or is it so that the district can use it for other?
The district, so the district can use it for other things, and youth sports can also have access to it for tournaments. I don't actually know if it's necessary for youth sports. We have a backlog problem. We've got practices that run until 10 o'clock at night because we can't get everybody circulated through. It would be a way to provide that service to the community.
And
That's why it's on the options list, so it can get voted on.
And that's why we listed it under a community function, because that's really what was driving the additional gym size, is a community need versus an educational program.
It also helps because we're possibly losing an auditorium, so that kind of offsets that in my mind.
It's probably just worth saying, we do have, our gyms are completely booked all the time. Obviously, spring sports, more kids outside, so there's a little bit of leeway there, but when you're in season where you need the gym between youth leagues, men's leagues, and our middle school and high school athletic teams, there's just not enough places for kids to go.
So the next grouping all had to do with various site aspects of the scheme. For R1, we're not changing anything on the site, so we left those neutral just as a checkpoint. I mean, everything stays the same. There'll be a little bit of handicapped access work done, but that's it. So there's no change to what happens. All of the other ones, from the renovation and the new ones, all have a smaller footprint. So they all increase the amount of green space on site, and they all give us more opportunity for outdoor learning and play fields and outdoor space, because they all take up less space than the current building does on the site. Welcoming street presence that's a completely somewhat subjective, especially at this level. But in terms of our previous conversation, we think the existing building is kind of neutral. The 3 new ones have the ability to either put a new face on the existing building or a completely new appearance towards the street. And we thought N1, we called it neutral only because of the concern that was expressed and that we share right now about the big gym being the first thing you see. And that seemed to be a slight differentiator. Not that it can't go to work around it, but that just seemed to differentiate a little bit.
N9.
N9, for N9, yeah. Because certainly last time we met, there was conversation around that issue of the gym being the first thing you see, so perhaps not as advantageous as the others. The improvements to parent drop-off and queuing, all the new ones improve it. The 2 renovation options, really don't. They leave it effectively the same as it is now. You don't really make any significant improvement. And if you fine-tune it, N9 is a little bit less queuing space, but it still improves it because you still have a loop, an additional loop. The riverfront resource area really had to do with whether we're building, as you recall, way back when we started looking at the site and some of the opportunities and constraints of wetlands and riverfront resource area. We talked about degraded space and are we going to improve the area. And so this really has to do with how much building is happening down the hill, so that the schemes that are more to the south and away from the river really work on improving that. And that's 1 and 3, because they're built the furthest south. We're pulling all the construction away from the river, so we're actually improving over the current condition. A couple of the others, the renovation option in 9 stays about the same. We may be removing building, but we're putting back parking or driveway, so it really leaves the site about roughly the same. It's a little early to fine-tune that, but that was our take on that.
Probably a minor point, but on the R1, my guess is that we would be required to abandon the parking lot along the river, and thus the site cost might go up a bit, and that we would be actually required to do some improvement over the doing nothing.
Okay.
So it's just
Yeah, we hadn't.
Yeah, we'd have to figure out where to put those spaces, but I'm pretty sure that if you touch anything in that area, it's going to be asked to be abandoned.
The next one was about pedestrian vehicular conflicts. That had to do with how we do sidewalks, students walking, where the entries are, where the auto drop-off is, the buses. Again, the 2 renovation options is staying the same as it is now, but some new sidewalks, some new curb cuts, but no fundamental change to traffic patterns. Whereas the three new options all make it better. We have better sidewalks, better space to walk, better ways to control cars so they're not, kids having to dart between them, better separation of traffic, so they all improve the situation in any of the new ones. The next one, again, was really about kind of, in some ways, the obvious efficiencies of the plan, and the current, and this was relative one to the other. If N1 is the, it's the square, and it's kind of the most efficient, compact plan, that's the most advantageous. If the current building, which sprawls everywhere and has so much exterior wall, is kind of the least advantageous, the others are all about the same. Our AR2, N3 and N9 are roughly the same, one to the other in terms of how much they sprawl on the site. They're really similar components, just arranged slightly differently.
I would argue that N3 is green and not neutral. I think when you look at.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
it's, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's perhaps a little more compact than 9 because of the way the gym is tucked in behind the
Yeah.
wings. It's at this level, it's a bit of a judgment call as you look at it, because we don't have super accurate drawings. But yeah, it certainly could go green.
Light green.
light green?
And then the last thing we added, which was, I think, TBD or X's or something, well, I guess we had the PSR cost before, or the PDP cost. We've added, just to get it all on the same page, this is the estimated, this is the total project budgets off of the previous spreadsheet, I hope. Yeah, I think we transcribed them correctly. And then the estimated district share below that, just to get it all kind of on one page so you can see it, just to give you a sense of one to the other. Those are kind of PSR costs.
With the caveat that the renovation might be 35.8 district.
And I think that's really the caveat, that if in fact the
That's true.
MSBA did not want to participate in that project, you could still do it, but you would be doing it maybe for $8 million. And that conversation has happened in other districts we work with too, where that's been used as the conversation point. Is it better for us just to go it alone and do this versus go through the MSBA process? And I think, certainly you can see there's actually a dollar value now that you can assign to going through the MSBA process is worth, and it's fairly significant. I know there was some questions asked about what it would cost not to do that. I think now we can see.
It's probably not fair to ask this question without giving you lead time, so just your best professional guesstimate. Of all of these designs, thinking in a 50-year ownership of the building, which do you think is, kind of, what's the green, neutral, or unfavorable on maintenance and upkeep over 50 years?
At this stage, I think the three new options certainly are about equal, because it's new systems, it's new buildings, it's brand new. AR2, you're going to have a hybrid building, even though on the renovated part, it's going to be stripped down to structure and put back. It's still a renovated building. R1, if it's just a code renovation, that's going to be the most. You're still going to have maintenance, ongoing maintenance over a period of time. It's just a code and systems upgrade, because you're not fundamentally altering a lot of it. But I just think at this point it's hard to judge them. And I don't even think at this point we could give you a good sense of what the utility costs would be, because any of these can get modified based on building systems to improve or
So I guess this relates to the how much it consumes, how large the footprint is. Is it safe to say the larger footprints are going to consume more heat? It's going to be harder to heat a larger, more sprawling building than it would be to heat a compact building, or is that all out the window now with newer systems?
Not the heat.
I think that heating and ventilating, they're all about the same floor area. In fact, actually, the N1 is actually slightly larger in terms of floor area. So it becomes a very complicated question, and any of the mechanical engineers in the room, feel free to jump in on this one.
Like I said, it's really not fair to ask you.
I didn't see you raising your hand.
Nothing big.
Perimeter wall has something to do with it, but the orientation of the building,
Okay.
where we're getting daylight, has to do with reducing electric costs in the classrooms. So the utility costs are more than just the heating costs. There's the ventilating costs, there's the electrical cost, and there's just plain floor area. And so in one, which looks more efficient because it's a box, it's actually a larger building, and over time, that's more volume, it's more air to move, it's more of everything. It's more floors to mop, it's more things to sweep, so if it's a larger building, I would argue the cost could be a little bit higher.
I've got a follow-up on that, twofold. I wasn't here last meeting, so the piano got larger because of additional circulation?
Yeah.
That hall along the.
Circulation of
Yeah.
people.
On 2
Single
floors,
loaded.
it was originally a U
Here.
circulation, and the request was to, kind of
Right.
close the loop. So when you close the loop on both floors, you end up with additional
Right.
square footage.
Which of these schemes do you think, of the new schemes, has the possibility of actually reducing in square footage? And which ones, or more prone to do that, or conversely grow?
Probably.
Sorry?
I mean,
Yeah, 3 and 9
Yeah.
would be easier to reduce,
3 and 9?
possibly.
Without changing the fundamental layout.
N1, the widths of the corridors are, I mean, there's a couple of areas that are a little bit more generous because we were thinking about pre-function space and lobby areas being a little bit more generous. But the corridor is the corridor. We need all of the corridor we're showing, which is why the square footage is higher.
Mhm.
It's less efficient. There's more single-loaded corridors in that plan.
When you're wrapping the gym, there's only so far you can pull the thing in, whereas the other 2 schemes, which have wings and pieces, those can be perhaps compressed a little bit. There's some areas on N9 that could be tightened up, so I don't know how much we can tighten them, but I think those 2, I would agree with Laura, I think those 2 have the most possibility.
What about if, right now, we have essentially box diagrams, so once some of those skins get smoothed out, so to speak, you're gonna add a little bit here and take away a little bit there. Is there a difference in that? So if you take the hook, for instance, that inside jog, right now you've got a sort of a jagged edge of classrooms. Do you envision that to be jagged as shown, or a sort of a straight skin?
Well, that's something we need, that's what we'll be looking at in schematic design. I think on all the schemes, the straighter we can make the exterior wall, the better. But that said, we also have programmatic need on the inside to create extended learning environments in the hallway. So, the simple box, which is just a long hallway and straight outside walls, isn't really going to support the kind of teaching and learning that's going on. So there's going to have to be some variation. The question is, how do we minimize that? Or how do we do what we did at the Hunking School, where we have straight outside walls, but we're able to arrange spaces, large and small spaces inside to make that work. So the answer is, our goal was going to be to reduce the jigs and jogs on the exterior.
Yeah.
In any case, that's, right now, you're right, it's boxes, so you sort of put them together, approximate a plan. But in all of them, we're going to try to, because that's going to maintain our cost control if we do that. Make the roof easier too, a lot easier.
So you think in the end, N3 and N9 are the ones that there's more flexibility?
More flexibility.
I think they offer more flexibility for area reduction than N1, only because N1 is it's got a solid core. In the middle, you just can't. The gym is the gym, and, if you build out from that with a corridor and classroom, that's where you are. Versus the other ones where you do have, as you point out, you have the ability, even here, you have the ability to slide this over, maybe this gets shorter. Over there, we've got the ability to perhaps slide some of this down, tighten the center. I mean, it's just got pieces that can move around, whereas I don't know what that one is. You're pressing it down on the donut, it's just not going to go anywhere. And in AR2, the upper part, the core is fixed because that's what you have now. And the lower part's pretty efficient as it is. That wing may offer a little bit of area reduction, but I doubt it's going to offer very much.
I was surprised that AR2 came in at, say, only 5% less than, I think it was N3, was the lowest of the new schemes, even though we're maintaining a large part of the core there.
I actually wasn't that surprised. It's gone this way on many projects, because if you really look at, we're building an awful lot of new in there. I mean, in terms of actual square footage, you've got a 2-story new classroom addition, which is a lot of new building. And the core, we're doing a substantial renovation. It's really what I would consider a gut renovation. We're taking it right down. We have to go and do seismic upgrades to it because of the long span areas have to be braced. So we're getting into the walls, and there's a lot of fussy work that's happening in that area. It's not an easy, it's not a difficult renovation, but it's an extensive renovation.
Okay.
So there's a lot going on there. And it's not unusual. I mean, a lot of the renovation addition schemes that we've seen over the years, the cost differential it's pretty close. It's usually not huge.
Yeah, another thing to note on that point too is that when you look at the direct work, trade work, the nuts and bolts, everything that to construct the building, when you compare AR2 to say N3, it's very comparable actually, just on the direct costs. When you consider the phasing and the modular costs, which actually is a very stark difference between the two, those start to pile on.
Right.
And since that's immediately ineligible, it just compounds the problem.
Yeah.
Jim, if you're taking it all the way down to almost a reconstruction, do you have any flexibility to change sizing? Like if, we talked about the fact the auditorium really doesn't hold everybody. Is there opportunity to expand the auditorium or expand the gym? Or are we pretty much locked into the structure, the perimeter as it's set, and you're just reinforcing the whole thing?
I think in terms of taking advantage of it being a renovation scheme, you're pretty locked in. I mean, the auditorium, because the slope goes back towards the entry, could we add seats? You could, but auditoriums are funny things because they're all proportioned for sight line. When you add seats, it usually doesn't work. So I find the auditoriums are extremely difficult to add to and almost impossible to do it in a way that would give you good sight lines. The gym you might be able to make longer, but only if you tore down, you wouldn't make it wider because the structure goes this way, and there's no easy way to make a gym wider. You could add a bay. We actually have done that before, where you knocked the end wall out and added a bay to make it longer, but that wasn't really your issue. Your issue was the width to get seating and things in. So.
But doesn't it then become, already it's more expensive than the cheapest new, so would it?
Oh, it would just raise the cost, yeah.
Yeah.
Just ask.
No, I know, just.
At some point, and I think if we were to go down that road, we would find that it would be probably ultimately less expensive to tear it down and build it up. Yeah, which would have been N8, I think.
However,
Hi, we're gonna wait for public comment until the committee is finished.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's do comments from the school building committee. Have any questions or comments on this? Go ahead.
so my question is just the process, the winnowing process, how we go about reducing the number. I would suggest that we first talk about the new and narrow down to one option there, and then compare the reno, the ad reno to that new.
How about, I was gonna propose that school building committee ask any questions, then school committee, and then public, and then we'll vote afterwards. Does that work for everybody? Great. So if you have any questions about this or the numbers, school building committee?
I actually have a question. So I know we've talked about these being schemes, and I understand that within kind of the four walls, so to speak, you can move pieces around and that sort of thing. But if we voted on one of these, are we tied into like the footprint, or could we, like, I guess, how extensive of changes could be made to these things as they stand?
It's a little bit of a moving target. You're tied into the general footprint.
Yeah.
And the general display. I know I'm using kind of wooshy words, but that's sort of the best I can do. So if you were to, I'm just going to pick two. If you were to select N9, you could not go back at the end of schematic design with something that looked like 1.
Right.
It would still need to look a lot like N9.
So
could the library and the gym and could the pieces move around? Absolutely, and it can get shorter and longer and taller, but it can't look completely different. It must be able to say, well, wait a minute, why did you said this was the direction you were going? Yeah. You can't backtrack.
So sorry.
I was going to give you an example. So in another elementary school project we're working on, The school was very close to the northern property line and therefore the abutters. And the abutters were very vocal about where the building actually sat. And so that was a valid concern. And ultimately, we ended up moving the entire building quite considerably. And then we also ended up, it used to be a straight building, we had to add a little kink to it. And as long as there's a logical and rational reason for changes that you're making, MSBA is gonna work with you on that, okay? I agree, it can't go from N1 to N9.
Right,
It's just
right.
it's too general, but yes, we can mold and shape this thing, and again, if there's a rational reason for why we're doing it, I think they're gonna work with us.
We had I had another similar example. We had a school where, for various reasons, we had the cafeteria here and the gym here at the end of this phase, and most of the way through schematic, and then we realized, for a lot of other reasons, it just made more sense programmatically to flip the two. We had to have we had to explain the rationale for it. We couldn't just say, well, we felt like it. But there was a clear rationale. It had to do with site circulation and deliveries and some other things, and they were okay with that. But it was still within the sort of general, it changed the floor plan a little bit, but it didn't change the overall diagram significantly.
So like as an example, I just want to understand if this is too big of a change. So let's say we voted on N3 and we wanted to move the gym to where the pre-K wing was, and then move those classrooms and the library over to the other wing. I mean, it would change the footprint, but would that be too big of a change, or is that kind of in the realm of what we would be doing?
So instead of a Y or V.
So move, I'm just trying to find it.
I'm just thinking about some of the feedback we heard last night.
Yeah.
So say that again, John, so move the gym to the pre.
Move
say
the
that-
gym up here?
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
Just
Yep.
swap the two.
Yep.
Just flip these two?
No, and then like the pre-K classrooms and the library go over into the other wing,
Yeah.
if it were to fit. I don't even know if it fits,
Yeah.
but.
You got all that,
So-
see that blue line?
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
This is a for instance.
I
This
was,
isn't
I was just gonna say, that's probably not gonna be determined by MSBA, that's gonna be determined by your site.
Yeah.
Because we have a very tight site with an existing building and all those wetland lines on there. So I think what JCJ has done is tried to get the building to work within all those parameters.
Right.
And so there may be a little bit of flexibility, and if, you know, you can move the big blocks around, but as long as it fits within that footprint.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And I think the other issue is with that is that when we talk about having the gym front and center, it's a 3-story building, it's, you know, is that what you want to have as you're pulling in the driveway?
Yeah, it was just an example,
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah.
No, I
But
get
just
it.
curious if like
I
you're.
think that sort of
That,
thing.
can that big a change be pulled off?
Right.
I think that sort of change is probably within the realm of possibility, but it would require some rationale and some conversation with
Okay.
SBA. Yeah. But the good news is you're leaving the building where it is, you're leaving it roughly the same.
Yeah.
And the site plan doesn't change, and that's what they're looking for.
Okay.
Okay, speak now.
I have a question mainly for Pam, just to revisit district versus community use of the gymnasiums. Just from my understanding, and maybe some people in the audience, because I don't know. And I assume that the high school uses the gym, but it seems like other community groups use that as well.
High school doesn't use the gym because it's not regulation size. So nothing from the high school.
Not this one, I'm talking about, because you're
Here?
talking about the high school gyms are overused, so
Yes.
that's why you were looking at
So-
a regulation size one
Yeah,
here.
so right now, the only athletic, sports teams that use the gym, and you should jump in, John, Parks and Rec and middle
You're-
school
you're
at
talk-
times.
Okay,
So
you're
our-
saying that,
The elementary gym right now is used for youth services, Parks and Rec, and middle school. And then we also ship a set of teams sometimes when we're too big over to Essex. We bus over to Essex or carpool kids over to Essex to practice in the gym. Both those gyms can't accommodate the men's rec league or any of the high school teams, so they stack up late for practices. So it would be a way to have multiple games going on at the same time, have different teams use different gyms. It's just,
but I guess my question is more that the community uses of the high school gyms take up time. I'm just trying to.
community doesn't use the high school gym other than the men's rec league.
Yeah, when it's free. I think, yes,
It's
so-
mostly sports teams practicing,
Okay, so
and just the number of
It's
teams
our own scheduling
consumes
complex, yes.
the schedule.
Okay. So it's more district-driven than community-driven, is what I'm trying to understand. is
Well,
the-
that's-
the
I
gym
think
use.
it's
A little bit of both.
It's both.
The scheduling issue, though, does exist just during the week, even for practices, just for the district programs alone. There are other outside uses that community would appreciate, but even without those, if I'm correct, that there is still insufficient amount of full court space for our own program.
Okay,
Currently.
that's what I wanted.
That
Yes.
drives the program, that drives practices later. Just like you have on the football field, sometimes you'll see practices going late because we have 2 turf fields, which I know for a community of our size may sound like a reasonable number, but based on the, the program that we have, sometimes things go late. I think this is another example of the same
I
type
think
of thing.
the easiest way to say it is both gyms are scheduled to capacity, but because one is regulation and one isn't, it makes the scheduling of it that more difficult, and you don't have the flexibility to interchange parts. So you can only put games in one location, you can't put games in another.
But it's more.
It's a combination. It's truly, I would say it's truly a combination of balancing the community access with the district need. And
The
we
schedule is so tight here too, because we only have that one regulation size gym, that it's back to back to back to back, almost to the end of, not the school day, but the work night. So it makes it very difficult to maintain, consistent with the level we want. And if some of that could shift, and we could just be in the middle of it, while the window of time for maintenance, and the two would be great.
High school gets priority, so they go in the first spots. That helps. Sorry. I'm a little tired. A little tired.
Okay? School committee, the reason I'm asking school committee to ask questions is that next week, once we make a decision, school committee has to vote to approve as well. So this is a good time for them to ask questions when everybody's in the room. So if school committee reps have any questions or comments or thoughts? I can't see you, so speak up. Okay. Nothing?
Nothing. My questions were answered the other day.
Great, so I'm going to open up to public comment, but I'm going to ask people to limit your comments to 2 comments. Otherwise, we'll be here very late, and we still have to vote, so.
And can I just also say the name?
Oh, yeah, name and town, and say it slowly, because Christina doesn't know everyone. Okay?
2 separate comments or 2 because?
2 separate. 2 times.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. It's your first time. Go ahead.
So, for those of you who don't, Eli Bowling, I'm on the Manchester Board of Selectmen, for you who don't know me. I'm going to speak from the perspective of a selectman, but obviously the board has not seen all of these, so I'm not representing the total. I'm going to say that option R1, politically to me, is dead on arrival. It doesn't really provide flexibility for future build-out. It doesn't improve the educational spaces to the modern standards. So you're going to start out with a core of people who are going to be unhappy, and you're going to start out with other people who think you're going to spend a whole lot of money to get exactly what we've got right now, only somewhat improved. That would be a very difficult lift for me politically. N9, I gotta say, to start with, the cost windows are, the cost ranges on these are larger and higher than I thought that they were likely to be. So there's an additional political lift for us, which is challenging. And so I think that N9, because it doesn't offer vastly different advantages to the towns and to the district, politically lifting an extra $6 million is also a non-starter. So I would just drop in that, unless you had some really compelling argument to make. So that leaves you with AR2, N1, and N3. N1, the piano, has its attractions, but there are 2 major political issues with it as far as I see for the town. 1, it's somewhat more expensive. 2, it doesn't provide as much flexibility for future expansion. So if there were a need for larger classes at some point or more class spaces, it wouldn't provide that flexibility. If there were ever a time where the community wanted to investigate building some shared resources with the school, it would be more difficult to do so in that place. And the way it's architected, it makes it more difficult for community spaces to be used for municipal voting town meetings. Well, maybe not so much for town meetings, but it's just a little bit more challenging of a cell as a community available space. So it has some higher political costs and doesn't seem to me to provide any real significant advantages over the other two options. AR2 and N3 are a little bit more challenging for me to separate out for you, because I know a lot of people were liking AR2 last night, and they liked it because they like the existing school and they like the existing auditorium, and they don't want to give up some of those spaces. Now, I think that politically, it's easier for us to lift something like N3 because it provides better options in the future for expansion if it's needed. And that kind of flexibility is something that voters are looking for. They're a little bit shy about how planning goes and how things change, and did we leave open the options, did we leave open the flexibility for making the changes that we need to if things changed. I mean, they already saw when we built this place that we had to jump through some hoops when the bubble moved through to fit people in when things got tight. And we managed it, but it still ended up causing a little bit of ill will. And it's to me, it's an easier sell if we have something that's more flexible and we can say up front that it's a more flexible space. And I think that's really about it. I think to me, N3 is the best option. You get a newer space, you get a more flexible building, and the costs are about the same. Now, whether or not that cost ultimately is something that we can sell,
Remember, this is conservative.
I know, I got it. That scares me a little bit.
Yeah, it scares all of us.
But of the different options, I'd say that it seems to me, based on the sort of rough numbers that we just kind of ran and the features that I just stated, N3 is the best option. That was one.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
One big one.
You might have exceeded your limit. Anyone else?
My personal favorite is N1 for a number of reasons, and a good chunk of them have been listed on that board.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Andre Kunemund, I live at 10 Moses Hill Road here in Manchester. And I've got soon two kids in Manchester Memorial Elementary.
What was the name one more time? Sorry.
Andre, A-N-D-R-E, K-U-E-H-N-E-M-U-N-D. So yeah, I attended yesterday's meeting, the one in the morning, and I came out of that one with N3 as my favorite. What strikes me now that I've seen some actual numbers is how close the numbers for AR2 and N3 are. And given that they're that close, I think it reinforces my view that N3 would be, for me, the way to go. Same as Eli said, the pure renovation, I think, is...
N3?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said N1.
Oh, no, N3.
Thank you.
Thank
Sir,
you.
you had a,
Yeah, thank you.
your name is?
Stephen Bates, Mascanoma Street, Manchester resident. This may perhaps have been addressed by you earlier. However, I understand that the state doesn't want to fund auditoriums. However, what about the option of a new gymnasium and leaving the auditorium? Even though the auditorium doesn't contain enough space for everybody, once it's gone, that acoustical space is over. Acoustics are an entirely different thing in an auditorium than in a gym. Acoustics have to do with music, have to do with performance, have to do with theater, and possibly with the public use of that space. So is there an option for a totally new gymnasium, which is of course necessary, leaving the auditorium, in other words, AR2, with a new gymnasium?
Yes.
Okay?
Does anyone answer?
Did you say yes? What did?
Are they gonna answer one?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I'm finished. I don't have number 2.
Not yet.
I don't believe that in the 14 options we looked at, there was one that saved just the auditorium. Certainly, those are always things that could be done. I completely agree on, sort of piggybacked on my comment earlier, which had to do with auditoriums being sort of very specifically designed things, and why you couldn't just expand it, because it is of a piece, so I would completely agree with that, and it is a different space than a gym. I mean, that said, if the gym is designed to be used for performances, we certainly will design it in a way that is designed for performances, but it won't be an auditorium. Well, we can address acoustics, we can address sound amplification of voices. But we did not look at it. We didn't look at a scheme that kept just those two. In part, I think, because of the structural complexity, because of the shared adjoint wall, and it just seemed a really challenging, if not potentially impossible task to separate those two, because they have a structurally joint wall, and I'm just not even sure we could do it physically.
Can I address that? We have an auditorium here that seats 500. It's right across the street. And I think one of the things that we're trying to be mindful of is that we're looking at building a new elementary school here. But in 10 years, we're also going to be looking at building one in Essex. So we're trying to build a building that gets the maximum reimbursement and is the most educationally sound but cost efficient. And so if folks have to walk across the street or maybe not drive to Memorial to see a performance, they come here where we have a seating for 500. Let's try to be mindful of the few times a year that we have performances against what we need every day. So we're trying to balance that and really trying to make sure that it passes in Essex. So that's kind of where we are with this, and I think that, I hope I'm speaking for someone on the committee, but
I would say, to the point of the comment, I mean, that was that was a lot of the rationale that we had in sort of going the addition renovation road, because there's an attachment to that auditorium, knowing that we weren't going to be able to get another one. At the same time, as we began to talk about it more and more, we understood that it doesn't hold the quantity of kids. It was built at a time when the school had a smaller capacity, and so, at some level, what good is it if it doesn't hold the kids that are in the school?
Can I just add one? I think also we did some site visits of other schools, and I would, at least I came away from those site visits, I guess I went on one, but I've been in a number of schools, that the combined stage with other space is actually quite nice in the schools that we visited. It's a different feel than an auditorium for sure, but it's kind of appropriate. It can serve the needs of a pre-K through 5th grade level musical performance. It doesn't, you're right, it's not where you want the K-band player, symphony to be played, but they would play in this building, that kind of thing, where the communities would be able to use this building. So I think it's, because I think we all have wrestled with that issue and are very mindful of it, but certainly anybody who has an opportunity to go and see a newer school or look online at the Huckings School, there are photographs online there of their stage, and they're really, they exceed expectations in terms of what you think of when you see, and then the other challenge, we were just talking about it from a construction perspective, is, again, hopefully we'll have another set of tours of Memorial, because when you go into the basement of Memorial and you look around, you don't really need to be a construction professional to understand the challenge of any kind of renovation that, in a cost-effective way there from the sort of the subterranean level up. And when you actually think about trying to make that seismic, and I'm very worried that budget is on contingencies not big enough. Tyler and others weigh in on that the reno and ad reno contingency numbers might be too low.
I would second that. Line number 2 of AR2
the 21 or so million for renovated space concerns me a bit, knowing what needs to go into the existing space for seismic, structural, energy
Contingency, just.
to meet
yeah.
current codes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Erin Greenwood, and I'm a new resident of Manchester as of this summer. I have 2 young boys. One will be in kindergarten next year, and another one in a few years. But my question is, and I might be the only person in the room who doesn't know this answer, but when all is said and done and the designs are voted on, and what is the time frame of starting construction? And does one design? I mean, I know we talked about, you know, what is least and most disruptive to students, but is one design going to take way longer than another, or just that time frame?
Yes, the short answer is yes. So I think earlier we were talking about phasing, and phasing just means the number of times that you're going to be building a portion of the building, and so I believe N1 is basically one phase, so that's probably the quickest. N3, I believe, is 2 phases. So that's in the middle, and then N9 has multiple, 3 or 4, three phases. And so N9 would be the longest. And so the other thing about them is that the modulars, the temporary classrooms is another big factor. We tried to find ways to minimize the use of modulars. You know, I also have parents in elementary school, and I know how I feel about them being in modulars, and so we did everything we could to try and minimize that. And so I think N3, in terms of modular use, is the front runner, which minimizes that. And I think we have 6 right now, and there could be opportunities to reduce that further. But so I think N3, in terms of modulars, is the front runner.
So right now, we don't have the opportunity for swing space. Pam's worked really hard for it, but say come next August, something comes up and Pam gets a phone call.
If something materialized,
that could change the whole scope of how long you know, what, because it won't be phasing, would be able to do, correct?
if a space that could house the whole building magically appeared, absolutely. It all becomes one phase.
And that's why I just wanted to make sure with the public here, that's you know, right now, there is no the swing space to be able to move everybody to, but if something became available, that would be an ideal situation.
That would reduce the construction duration of any of these, and it would eliminate the need for the modulars, so that cost would go away.
Yep.
Right now, just so you, it's 2 million just for the modulars on the N9, so it's like, ooh, you know, that's a
N9
killer.
has the most.
Yeah.
In terms of impact on the kids, I like N3, and I almost like it better than transferring offsite. I know offsite has a different implication for the construction process, but for the kids, if I understood it correctly, it's one move. They stay in familiar territory while the core is being built.
The classrooms are being built.
The core of the classrooms are being built, and then they move once. And we may have to move, we may be able to figure out something to keep everybody there, or we may just be able to group the pre-K together, or the pre-K in another location. So in a way, that might have the least impact on the kids in terms of movement and transitions. But we'll keep working to see if another site becomes available.
And I still
Cross that
strongly
bridge at that
feel
time.
it's just a matter of, I hate the thought of having kids on the area with construction trucks going through and workers, and I just personally, and I don't even have children, but I just think to myself, my small child, I would want just in a place that they don't have to worry about that. Yes, they may have to be on a bus ride for a little bit longer, but that's, I mean, if we don't have the space, we don't have the space, or if ideal space doesn't become available.
And realistically, they do, if that is the case, which is what it's leaning towards, I mean, they do this all the time. I mean, it's definitely not ideal.
And that's
but
one of the reasons we want to see them at risk, is because of that factor.
Can you just answer, I don't know if your question was also a simpler question of how long is the project? So we're knee-deep in a lot of these issues of phases, et cetera. Generally, the process, and we had a presentation yesterday, went through it, we're going to try to close the loop on choosing a preferred option now in the next, tonight through the next week or so. Once that's done, and MSBA approves what we do, hopefully, the next phase is designs, so we can really know what we're talking about. And that process will be wrapped up on our end, hopefully by the end of school, then goes back to MSBA for them to approve it by the end of the summer, and then we come to the communities for with a design and a real tight budget that's based on much more detail than what we have tonight.
Do we get the CM involved at that point?
The CM would be involved a little bit earlier to help make sure that the schematic design and estimates are all tight. And then when that happens, the community would get their chance to weigh in and vote in the fall. And if that is successful, typically takes about a year roughly for the very specific design specifications, detailed blueprints, et cetera, drawings to be made, and then about 2 years to 3 years to build the building. And correct me, professionals, if I've misstated that, but I think I know a lot of people have this very simple question of just, when would we be moved in if this were to go forward? And so, is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, no, it is, and, you know, I would, on the construction end, I would say less than 2 years with no phasing, but I think the 2 to 3 implies that some of these options, which haven't been voted yet, have phasing, so I would agree with the 2 to 3 as well.
So start building a year from this fall, so this is 18, fall of 19, potentially start building, and then about 2 years plus from there to move in.
Thank you.
You're
Both
welcome.
answers were great.
Angus, right?
Axel.
Axel.
My
And
name
you
is Axel Magnuson, Mascanello Street in Manchester. You've all been through a visioning process. You have imagined what a new school could be and should be. And I wanted to ask you, particularly the teachers among you, which of these designs really makes your heart sing?
Well, I'm the only teacher here. I really like the hub, for me, really kind of pulls the, I like the way that the classrooms are kind of put together. I like how the specialists are put together.
And hub is not, N3.
N3, sorry. And I think it feels like a welcoming building, the way that it's adjusted on the land. And I like the community access for, in particular, the gym.
And the rest of you?
I still have a teacher certification.
You're qualified.
I like N3 too, and for some of the same reasons that Maggie, I think it feels very, we kept talking about having it be warm and welcoming, and if you ever go into Essex Elementary, it kind of feels like it gives you a big hug, and I can envision the way Lauren has kind of positioned that front entry to be a very welcoming environment, and how she's described some of the possibilities for the two-story entry. I think it can be both traditional and cost-efficient, but yet welcoming and exciting, and the way they want to set up all of some of the more high traffic areas for the media center and the STEM labs right in the front, so you can see kids at work. It speaks to me. I think that's the one that calls to me as being something that's in line with where we want to be educationally.
Okay,
And as an educator myself, not in the classroom anymore, but same support and comments here. I would echo everything Maggie said in particular.
I mean, you have to find something new to say.
Okay, so well, it happens to be the same one. The hub, I think just the name itself kind of explains why I like it. It's really important to me to have a building that promotes community among the staff and also the students, and kind of feel like home. And the hub has kind of that home base in the center, as opposed to our building now, where it is so sprawling. You know, there's so many entrances also. You know, Maggie could come in, park in her parking space, enter through one of the back doors, teach all day, and leave and never see, you know, the rest of the staff.
Every day.
Yeah. So I think this will really bring us all together. And another huge thing with it is the separated community access, so that, you know, we can operate on a school day. And we can have things like voting and that sort of thing take place, and safety and security would be upheld still.
I think it has all those other boxes checked.
What?
I just had a question. Miriam Bradford, Old Essex Road. Just a quick question. If the town and the large contingency of people who don't come to these meetings votes and says, I'm not paying for that school because blah, 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 what happens? Like, do you just, that's it, we're done? Or do we have like a backup?
Start again.
So that's happened before. You voted again. We'll vote it again, possibly in the spring.
Okay.
And then we would probably have to go back to the drawing board if it doesn't pass that.
Okay. Is there like a backup plan? Like, is there
So to
a?
encourage people to come out and learn as much
I
ahead
have.
of time as possible.
She's here.
Andy's right on. We vote in November. If we miss, we can regroup and vote again in the spring. But if we have 2 failed votes and it appears that the community isn't supporting what we're doing, we may lose our place in line with the building authority and have to go back to square one and possibly go through feasibility again. So we would be, it would be delaying we would be putting ourselves in jeopardy of adding costs where we didn't need to if we truly want to go forward with this, because the building's going to continue to age. We're going to run a higher risk of really costly repairs, roof and mechanicals, and we may have to go through another feasibility, which is another outlay of close to $1 million.
A really important thing to add to that, we talked about this, Gordon, and that the escalation costs is 6 to 7, where you guys are in the, so every year we wait, this project goes up.
Gets more expensive.
Gets more expensive by 6 to 7%. So I ran the numbers last night a little bit. So for every $10 million that a project costs, roughly, if you wait 10 years, that 10 million goes to 16 or 17 million. So every 10 years we wait, it goes up by 70%. That's the compounding effect of, I think I ran it at 6%, but whatever, you can do the numbers. So it's a compounding cost increase, and I think that's going to be very important for us to remember. No one wants to spend, money to do these things. It's a challenge for sure, but it's just a reality of things. So and we're very mindful of that. I think the other thing that I like about what has been done tonight is that there's it's a conservative, there are a couple of places I see that are conservative here, I think, in terms of all this what's in and what's out, trying to.
Just to reinforce also what Pam said about maintaining the existing structure, if we aren't successful and the district has to invest money into the existing school, there's some major upgrades, like a whole new roof, and not just roofing roof, structural roof. Right. And then you're putting all that money over functionally obsolete space, which is, you have to weigh spending a little bit more money to get something new that's going to last 50 years or continuing to put lipstick on this.
So is there my second question? You can have your second question. Is there a marketing plan for the
Not yet.
town or a political plan?
So we have to decide what we're going to do before we can start saying what we're going to do.
Okay.
So in the next 2 months, we're going to be solidifying that, and you're on my list right now. So we're going to need help, because we need to convince people this is a good investment, and especially people in Essex, because there's a limited investment there in terms of what they get out of it, but they have to think district-wide, and they have to be assured that in 10 years their building will be addressed and will have parity. So we need to make those cases in both towns, and we need help convincing people that this is a sound investment.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
We'd like to wrap up as soon as we can.
Quick question, Shannon Erdman, Walker Road, I also serve on the school committee. Follow-on question to what Sarah brought up. If you look at the price of what this building cost, which was, remind me,
49 million.
40-ish? What was it?
49 million.
49 million. So if you look at that, and then you kind of take escalation costs or increased construction costs into account, however many years down the road we are,
13.
those numbers kind of make a little bit of sense, right? They're in line. So it's...
And the data is reflected on the MSBA website for all their they're a huge database of project costs. You know, you can sort of see the trend built over the years. I would say that it's not necessarily always straight line escalation, of course. You know, we happen to be in a pretty busy market the last several years. It can flatten, it can dip, it can go back up again for sure. Hard to predict.
But on average, on a relative basis, those numbers we're looking at for the 3 new projects make sense, and they're relatively in line, correct?
What was the square foot cost here?
It's like
234,
235.
235
without the sites.
I think it was 250 total, maybe?
This one,
Maybe.
450,
I was gonna say
450 roughly
285
for
for all.
these, right?
With site and soft cost too.
Yeah.
Without site.
And the,
So can I just ask though, as far as this number we're saying is conservative, is it the end of June that we will have more concrete? Like, once we pick the one, will it be more?
Yeah, you'll have actual drawings to
So-
look at and like an estimate.
So we'll
that you
have
can-
from
yeah.
basically June till November to do the marketing and making sure that the public understands what we're really talking about.
You'd actually have until town meeting dates, which would be in September. Not until
Yes.
November. The election would be in November.
Oh, correct.
Town meeting dates will see 6 weeks ahead of that.
And countries all over the world have elections in 6 or 8 weeks, and we can do that. I mean, we can get the marketing done. I'm not worried about that.
Tom, do you have a ballpark date on when the town meeting would be for planning?
I think it's election day, isn't it?
Well, election day is November 6th, and it has to be 6 weeks before that.
Well,
So,
we're actually going to talk about that.
Oh, okay, so we'll figure it out.
Greg, you had a question?
Yeah, I do.
Greg
Two comments.
Fettersfield.
Greg Fettersfield, Town Administrator here in Manchester. Two comments. One, I think of all the choices, I think it's coalescing around N3, which makes a lot of sense. With the caveat, though, if you can get MSBA to say definitively that they will not pay or contribute towards a renovation, that cuts your debate by more than 50%. So I would do everything you can to get MSBA to make that rule. The sooner the
so we
better.
know, yeah, absolutely. I would, right?
When will that be rejected? Will we submit PSR? Like, we'll submit our
I think it would
preferred.
be rejected at FAS.
I don't-
You would never get through an FAS.
I don't believe, I personally, I don't believe they would offer an opinion on any scheme that you don't submit. You would have to select it, submit it, and then they would have to reject it, which would set us back months, because then we'd be back in line. The next step will be going to the Facilities Assessment Subcommittee, the FAS, that's another acronym. And that's where we all meet around the table with them, and they'll ask questions about the ed plan, how does the ed plan, they'll spend a lot of time asking us to explain to them how the educational plan is reflected in the building.
Yep.
And if we were to go in there with your current educational plan and R1, we couldn't make the case that it's reflected at all, and it would be a very short meeting, and they would say, thank you, we're done. And then best case then, we would be back to come back and re-vote on a different scheme, and go back in another, then for the next board meeting, which will be a couple months down the road, so it pushes everything off.
So we submit it, we have to submit it more to prove the case that us going in the direction of a new building isn't frivolous. There isn't an option here that needs to be considered.
What will happen is, when you submit your scheme, we'll be giving them all of this other background. When they agree with your decision, they are also saying, we agree that of the ones you've submitted, that is the best option for you. I think that's a fair.
Jim, is it possible for JCJ to provide us with some sort of written opinion that the renovation just isn't going to comply with the board standards? Based upon your professional experience?
He almost has with this sheet right here.
No, right. The report that we submit will offer opinions on every one of these in terms of how they comply or don't comply with your standards. So yes.
Right, because I think politically, Greg makes a great point.
Yeah, no, that'll be part of it.
Right, and I guess let me just say it a different way. So we're required by the MSBA to look at a renovation. That's just what we're required to do. And the reason they do that is because they want to know if you have a building that can actually solve the educational program and be renovated. So our study is going to say, yeah, we can renovate it, but no, it does not solve the educational program. And so that's dead on arrival for them. But we have to study it, we have to look at it, and as soon as they see that it doesn't solve the educational needs for what we're looking for, it's dead on arrival for them too.
Why would you ask taxpayers to invest in something that doesn't meet the needs?
Well, I think
It's just a way of
They
framing
need,
it.
it's part, it's,
It's
they,
based on
they,
standards-based
It's all about position.
Summary.
It's a standards-based
So we just need to
assessment, it
change
doesn't
these
meet
so
the.
that
Yeah,
it's
so we'll reflect that,
reimbursements,
yeah.
But when they
Okay,
were here and toured it off the cuff, MSBA basically looked at us and said, this
Yeah.
is not a renovate
Yeah.
building.
That's part of
Right,
the
it's
reason.
more
I mean,
how
that's
do we,
First thing they said.
so we
I
need
think to
to
Greg's point,
pull that up.
and Adam's point, it's just a way of communicating an objective assessment that this is a poor investment that wouldn't pass muster and get financial support, something to reinforce our.
Well, I was trying to answer the question just by saying, I don't believe you'll get a separate opinion, but I think within the approval, that will be inherent in the approval that you get on the scheme you submit, that the renovation option is not applicable. Because if they thought it was, they'd tell you. So we can find a way to message that.
Okay, any other public comment? Great. Okay, so we can do one of two things. We can go through each option and knock them off, or we can have one advanced. What do you want to do?
I move that we advance N3.
I second that.
So there's Crichton and O'Donnell. Discussion. Does anyone want to fight this?
We discussed this ad nauseam.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts.
You always do.
No.
Go back to the piano, come on.
No, I think we could have done this in 15 minutes, but, all those in favor?
Well, actually, no, you just said we had a discussion, I would like to.
Go
make a
ahead.
comment. Yeah, thank you. So I don't disagree with the selection of N3 or any of that. I just would like to suggest that maybe, even if we do vote for one, that we have a process where we can take a little bit of time to go through these budget numbers. Obviously, the budget isn't really set at this phase. It's not going to be set until we have schematic design. But I think we would be wise to spend some time to be more informed about the details here, so we can learn as much as possible about everything that goes into the cost, so that as we move through the phases, we're really knowing this in and out. We have a great professional team that's advising us. I want to make sure that the people on the committee are familiar with that. And it may be that there are folks who are more in the design and construction world who are already familiar with it, and that's great. I just want to make sure we have a process as a committee to get up to speed on a large amount of information that we've received that is highly important to everybody.
Is that something we could do at a subsequent meeting? Because we have to do something similar with the ed plan itself.
Yeah, it does not need, I would not recommend we do it tonight, that's for
We
sure.
do a
Oh,
small,
okay.
small
Yeah,
group.
okay, that's all.
I want to have a meeting with you after that.
Small group?
Yeah, I think we can discuss, we don't even need to work out how it happens, I'm just saying, there's a lot of important information, and I don't want to hold up a vote on the option, because I think financially, the numbers are not sufficiently different, and everyone seems to prefer N3. So I'm not getting in the way of a vote, I'm saying we need a process to address the budget.
Just to
at the year earlier.
say for the sake of the folks that bothered to come here tonight, we have had a lot of discussion about these various options before tonight, and there's been, sort of a building consensus for N3, I think for a lot of the reasons that people have stated tonight. Not the least of which I think it does offer a lot of flexibility going forward for being able to wrestle with the budget and perhaps, skinny it down a bit.
I think Avi makes a good point that there's, particularly Avi and a few, and others need to really dig into the numbers, we understand them, but the other thing is, this isn't a final budget for the people who, we've all been talking about that. This is a kind of a tool to look at things, but hopefully the upper limit, but.
There's a lot of work that still has to be done.
That's kind of what I'm saying. So I would like, while we decided an option, I would like our work on budget to begin in earnest, knowing that there's going to be a lot more detail when we get to this. We don't even have a set of drawings yet at this point, so we know it's very high level and for comparative purposes only.
Lisa?
I wanted to point out a difference between AR2 and N3, which I think is substantial, is that the ad reno is 10% larger. There's 8,300 square feet more in that than there is in the N3. And of that, we talked about maintenance costs and upkeep costs over time, heating costs. That's a 10% larger building. And it also retains original older structure, which, you know, it sounds kind of silly, but at the end of the life of this building, that stuff's going to be 100 years old, if not more. And it's not going to be, it didn't get the same points for being green because you are working with existing structure. So I think there's, and it actually, in the estimates, understandably, they are estimates, it's comparable, it's not slightly more. So, you know, just looking at keeping a portion of the building doesn't actually, to me, make sense from that perspective.
So I just have, I'm going to say one comment. So there are a lot of notes on these boards, and if we have chosen N3, if any of those comments that people make may be able to be, you know, put in, or, you know, just so that we make sure that we capture, and if there's anything we can do, I think that would be good.
Well, we want to make sure that they're comments that we would agree with as a committee, not, I wouldn't want architects to take those notes and say, yeah, let's go with it.
No, I'm just saying to document, just so that we can,
Yes.
you know, if we're working on it, say, oh, well, you know what, this is probably a good idea to add that in, type of thing. I'm not saying to do it, I'm saying so that we have it
I think
documented.
some really good points were made at the public meeting last night, especially about parking on N3. But I presume that's, of course, stuff that we can work through.
Jim?
The plan is for us to transcribe these for you, bring them to a subsequent meeting, because these will inform the next phase, which is schematic design, and there may be comments on the other schemes
That's what I'm thinking.
uncover things that you want to talk about, and there may be commonality. So we'll bring those to you, and as well as the commentary that we heard at the public meetings. There's going to be more, there'll be meetings with teachers, there'll be meetings on site, there's many more meetings to happen to gather input during schematic design, so we can fine tune whichever one of the options you move forward.
I'd just add that with N3, while it speaks to my teacher side, it also speaks to a practical side and a desire to continue that community collaboration. So I think it checks a lot of boxes. The flexibility piece that was raised, I think the lesson learned here is the pods are amazing at the middle school, but we were pretty limited. So it gives us that growth flexibility. It gives, it maintains the community access in a way that I think works best for both parties. And it speaks to teachers, so I think it really does check all boxes.
Okay, so we're going to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? So does this mean we don't have to have a meeting on Monday? Because gosh.
What are you
I was going to bring
I was
Riverside.
just gonna say, somebody may be watching a football game the night
Use that
before,
for
I
our
don't know.
budget.
So wait, we're not done.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you. Okay. Steve, back at you.
Mike's driving.
Mike,
Prize, 3 nights.
All right, check it out.
belabor every point.
Still chocolate was on
All
it.
right.
Fantastic.
Just so you know, George and Charlie had both given their votes for N3 as well, so I think it was George and Charlie, who are not here. Okay. And Mike, what are we doing?
I liked your comment.
Next steps.
Flexibility.
So we had that as a placeholder, just to continue this discussion, which we no longer need, so we'll clear that. So there will be no building committee meeting on February 5th, which is Monday. We will be here for a
Cancel
joint,
that now.
a joint SBC and school committee meeting to formally approve the submission to the MSBA on the 13th.
Okay, so that means that we have to have a quorum of this committee in order to get that approval of the PSR.
I sent out the meeting invite today to everyone, and I asked Pam, I don't know if you want me to forward that to the school committee or if you want to, but we just need to make sure we have a quorum for the joint school building committee.
School committee's there.
Oh, they'll be there.
It's a regularly scheduled meeting for us.
Oh, okay,
so they'll be
good,
there.
okay, good.
And this will be the initial part of the meeting, and then people don't have to stay if they don't want to.
Oh, good.
Not you have to.
Following the 13th, we will formally make the submission to the MSB on the 21st. And that sets us up, what's not on here, but it sets us up for the board meeting in April. Following that, we do have a placeholder for a building committee meeting on March 13th, and that'll be primarily to discuss procurement of the CM and specifically the qualifications portion and publishing the RFQ to garner some interest and solicit responses to start to get a CM on board, which will take us over the course of the next few months.
So I know that you invite folks to put their names forward, right? Is that how that works for CM?
So it's a public procurement process, so we advertise in the Central Register, locally in the newspaper, and so we try to garner as much interest as possible. It's a two-step process where we publish for interest and publish an RFQ where they submit their qualifications. We then pre-qualify that group to then submit a proposal, and that proposal is more specifically about your project and not so much the qualifications that we already got out of the way in the first step. And the second part of that proposal process is a price proposal, and so that'll be our first glimpse at CM's fees and price for the project.
To clarify that, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're getting a price proposal from the top-ranked firm, not from all the firms, is that correct?
So the CM at risk process, procurement process, the statute requires you to interview everybody that you pre-qualify. So if everybody makes the cut, you would then interview in that second step.
So you would get a price proposal from everybody?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to make this longer, but I just want to know, is there any work that has to be done by working groups? Like, does Adam need to look at contracts or any sort of things that go out? Does the design subcommittee need to meet and talk about anything before those things?
Yeah, I think there is. And
Okay.
that's, we're going to discuss actually what goes into the RFQ and what gets published. And so there could be a focus group that helps hone the language that goes into the RFQ before that.
Okay. Great. And you'll give us a heads up and then we'll know. Great. Next slide, yeah? Any more public comment?
Eli's still here.
You've
So
used
that
up your two, I think.
I think you
No?
only used one.
Great.
Only one.
Okay, anything else in the school building committee? All those in favor of adjourn, how do you do the adjourn?
It just
Motion
popped
to
up, I
adjourn.
don't know what happened.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, guys.